This series that we're in, called the End Commandments, is built on the idea that we're coming out of Easter, coming out of the celebration of the resurrection. And to some degree, it's still surprising to me how many conversations I have with people, both in our church and outside our church, who haven't quite captured yet that Christianity was and is a resurrection religion. It's a resurrection religion. Far too many people experience frustration in their faith and in their life because they picture Christianity as a rules religion or as a rituals religion. But it's not. It's not at all. It is entirely a resurrection religion. Because of that, it's fascinating to me some of the things Jesus said after he rose from the dead. There aren't all that many of them, but this passage from Matthew 28 is one picture of that where you see Jesus give both a distinction about who he is and a direction. He says, "All authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me." What's he saying? He's saying, listen, there was an old covenant. It was what it was. It served its purpose for its time, but it's fulfilled. Now, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Listen to what I say. And then he says, so go and make disciples. Help people learn how to live the life that I'm living. Do that all over the world of all nations. Baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And this is very important. Teach them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And I'll be with you always. So picture this. This is so important. Jesus is giving us a direction. What are the words that came out of his mouth that we need to follow? And he's telling us that it really matters that he's with us, that he came back from the dead, that there's a power that's available to us that is the same power that rose him from the dead. And we start to weave these together, and we can actually take the things that Jesus taught us that seem impossible, and they become possible. That's what the End Commandments is all about. It's not the 10 Commandments. That was part of the Old Covenant, and the Old Covenant was good for its purpose. These are the End Commandments. Jesus taught 5 different things that he did not want people to do. When he first told them not to do them, they seemed impossible, and then he rose from the dead, and we discovered they're actually possible. Last week we talked about do not fear. Next week we'll talk about do not worry. We'll talk about do not judge and do not doubt. But today we're going to talk about the words that came out of Jesus' mouth when he said, do not sin. Now, when we talk about sin, it's probably good to have a little definition of what that means. Sin is simply missing the mark. It's knowing what God wants you to do and not doing it. It can be doing something wrong. It can be not doing something right. And the truth is we're all infected with this to some degree. In the Garden of Eden, it was when Adam and Eve decided to go their own way instead of God's way. That's what sin is. But to capture the essence of what Jesus was saying, I want to put you into the midst of the story where he was saying it. And I actually think for this story, if you and I could kind of back ourselves up, put us in that setting, and feel what the people around him felt as he was saying it, it will help us to see what he was actually saying and the possibilities it opens up to us. And so I'm going to spend part of today casting the background. And when I cast this background, it may very well seem like I'm trying to be dramatic. Here's the only thing I know. As dramatic as I try to be today, I cannot describe to you how dramatic this actual setting would have felt. So let's try to rewind ourselves, put us in this crowd that Jesus is with, and we actually get a description that John, one of the followers of Jesus, was writing down in John 8 about where this happened. It starts like this. It says, at dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts. Now, I don't know if you can picture the temple courts. Some of you have been to Jerusalem and maybe even seen the Temple Mount, which would have been the temple courts. This is actually about a 30-acre plot. And you tend to think maybe about a building that is the temple, but the building of the temple was just one big structure on a broader acreage. This really was kind of a town center. It was a marketplace. There would be, farmers markets going on here. People would buy and sell things. Jesus would eventually flip over some tables, not because people were buying and selling things, but because they were cheating people right in the shadow of the temple. Now, in addition to this building that is the temple, they had courts, and these courts were called different things. Some courts the Gentiles were allowed in, some courts the women were allowed in. But when you get to the very center, you get to the temple, and then the center of the temple is what they called the Holy of Holies. And in that day, people believed that God literally dwelt in that Holy of Holies. The presence of God was there. The nation of Israel, all through the Old Covenant, had taken the Ark of the Covenant, which contained the actual stones of the 10 Commandments, and they had placed them inside that room that was the Holy of Holies. So this represented something powerful. And Jesus would go up there many days to teach, and a crowd would gather around to listen to him teach. Now, let me describe one other thing about this. Archaeologists have unearthed a very wide, like 200 feet wide set of steps that went up to the temple court. And what would happen with these steps is people would know that to atone for their sin, they would need to bring their sin and bring their sacrifice up to the temple. And there was a place in the midst of this busyness of the marketplace and the temple and the teaching, all of that, a place where they would literally sacrifice a goat or a sheep or some animal to atone for their sins. So it's early, it's at dawn on this morning. I don't know if you've ever been in a major city where you were kind of up before the city was up, and then you got to kind of watch the city wake up. It's kind of a fascinating experience. And that's exactly what was happening here. This is dawn. There's no electricity back there. Nobody went out before dawn. It's the beginning of the day. Jesus is going up to where he usually went to, and it is unusual that a crowd was already there. This is how popular Jesus had become. And that was part of the problem to the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. So at dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. First thing in the morning. Then this happens. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman who'd been caught in adultery. Now, piece this together with me for a little bit. Chances are she was not caught at 5 a.m. That's usually not how adultery happens. Chances are she was caught at 10 p.m. or midnight, and they had caught her in the act of adultery, and then they had just decided, we're just going to hold her. We're going to hold her all night long so that, since we know where Jesus is going to be at dawn, we can bring her at dawn. There was no concern for this woman. She was simply a pawn in their game. And one of the things that you will find will frustrate Jesus the most is whenever you use a person as a pawn. They made her stand before the group, and they said to Jesus, follow this. Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. Everyone knows that was wrong. I mean, this is one of the 10 commandments, right? Exodus 20:14, thou shalt not commit adultery. Everyone agreed this was wrong. But it's the next thing they said that gets their attention. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? And I have to imagine at this moment, you could have heard a pin drop. There's the woman, probably embarrassed with her head hung low. There's the teachers of the law who are essentially putting Jesus on trial. There's the crowd that had gathered for Jesus to teach, and everyone's looking at Jesus. If there is a sound, maybe it's just the sound in the background of another animal being sacrificed for someone's sin. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Jesus, what do you say? And as near as I can tell, Jesus probably had 3 options for what to say. Option number 1, he could have said, well, that's what the law says, so do it. He could have said that. It's very important for us to understand that though he could have said that, and though that is what the law says, he did not say that. Option number 2, if Jesus was a little more snarky, like I'm snarky, I think Jesus would have said, oh, glad you read Exodus 20:14. Have you read Leviticus 20:10? Here's what Leviticus 20:10 says, boys. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death. Where's the guy? Where's the guy? It always works this way with you guys. It always works this way with the religious leaders. You grab the woman, you put somebody on display, you're using her as a pawn. This isn't right. Jesus could have said, he didn't say that. I mean, he could have said that. I would have said that. Jesus didn't say that. Option 3. Jesus could take this moment where the religious leaders have an agenda to force Jesus to define who he is. And he could just take the moment to define who he is. Maybe not in the way that they expected, and maybe not with the consequences that they were hoping for, but he could actually take the moment for definition. So the passage goes on. They were using this question as a trap. Of course they were. They had orchestrated this whole thing. They were trying to push Jesus to rile up enough angry people that he would eventually be executed in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Now, the scriptures do not tell us what he wrote on the ground with his finger. Some of you have been around when I've taught this passage before. Sometimes I'll speculate. I'll say, well, maybe he was writing the sins of the men who were the accusers on the ground. Honestly, as I've studied a little more, I don't think that's probably what he was doing. There's a part of me that thinks they've been living under these 10 commandments, which for them had expanded into about 613 commandments. And maybe what he was writing on the ground was, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Because one of the things Jesus consistently did was he said, all those 10, those 613, they all hang on these two. This is what it's about. Is that what's happening here? Are people loving God and loving their neighbor? I have another thought about what Jesus was doing. I kind of wonder if he was just doodling. I'm kind of serious. Like some of you are doodlers. Not everybody's a doodler, but for those of us who are doodlers, this is kind of how it works. When we're thinking about something, or we're talking to someone, or something's important, we're just kind of doodling, right? And there's a part of me that thinks Jesus was just down there, and people didn't know what he was doing. We don't even know if it was sand. It might have just been like paved blocks or something, so he couldn't even write something. He's just sitting there thinking maybe he's just trying to create a little time and space for everyone to reflect a little bit about what's going on right here. The teachers of the law were impatient with that, and so they kept on questioning him. And when they did, he straightened up and he said to them, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. How about this? Any one of you who is righteous enough to bring about the condemnation, to bring about the punishment, go for it. Any one of you who is without sin. Now think about where they're standing. Every one of these guys, they had walked up those steps with their sin and with their sacrifice. There was not a single one of them without sin. Ironically, except for Jesus. There was one in this setting who was qualified, if he so chose to condemn her. And then he stooped down again and he started writing on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. And there's a part of me that really wants to give these religious leaders at least the benefit of the doubt here. To say, listen, if we're going to take down Jesus, we'll have to fight another day, different day. Today's not going to be the day. Maybe, this would be so wild in today's world, and I'm sure in their world, maybe people who had an agenda actually felt conviction. I mean, nobody expects that today. Every time you're in an argument and you have an agenda, it's outrageously rare for someone to stop and actually say, you know what, I was wrong. If you convene a courtroom or a congressional hearing or anything else, nobody ever actually comes to the moment of conviction. They just keep defending their point. But what if? What if there was actually a moment of conviction among the older ones first? The ones who had taken the most journeys up those stairs and down their stairs with their own sin. So that only Jesus was left and the woman was standing there. So, Jesus straightened up And he asked her, I think with a smile, "Woman, where are they?" Woman, look around. Lift up your chin, it's okay. Where are they? Has no one condemned you? Now it's very important to get this word right. The question is not, has no one accused you? She had been accused. And the question is not, this is very important, the question is not, did no one find you guilty? She was guilty. The question is, even though you've been accused and even though you are guilty, is there no one left to punish you? Is there no one left to penalize you? Is there no one left to kill you? Is there no one left to condemn you? Is it possible that you're guilty of what you've done, but you won't have to experience their condemnation? Yes, that's possible. Right here and right now. And then, before I show you what Jesus said next, I want you to think about this. There's two audiences with their eyes glued to Jesus. The men had walked away. The accusers had walked away. There's now this crowd. There's no doubt some in the crowd who had not decided yet to be followers of Jesus. And what they're doing is they're watching Jesus like some of you are watching Jesus, because you're not a follower of Jesus and you're trying to decide, who is this guy? What does he stand for? What does he claim? He's about to say something. I need to zero in on this, because what he says next will bring definition to who he is, how he sees the world, in contrast to how others have seen the world. That's one audience, people who aren't followers. There's another audience. To some degree, it's her, of course. But it's also everyone who's sitting in the crowd who knows they are her. Because she's not the only one with sin. We're all the ones with sin. And so I'm kind of glad she's on the hot seat, but I'm kind of watching what Jesus is going to say to her, because what he's saying to her is basically also what he's saying to me. And I'm wondering, as a follower of Jesus, how's this going to work out when I'm guilty? So Jesus said to her, "Then neither do I condemn you. Now go and do not sin. Go and sin no more. Go and leave your life of sin." And for the people who were trying to figure out whether they were going to be followers of Jesus, whether they could buy into what he was selling, whether this definition would make sense or inspire them, surely the response was, "Oh my goodness, that's who Jesus is. He did not come to bring condemnation. He didn't come to bring the punishment. He didn't come to bring the fear of God on people who are rebelling. He came to do something entirely different." And for the woman or the crowd that was processing this, maybe like we're processing it this morning, there's the idea that Jesus said, "I'm not going to punish you. That's not what this is about. But I do need you to go and leave this life of sin. You were guilty. You are guilty. You gotta walk away from that. You have got to walk away from that." Here, in my best description, I think, is what's happening here. We should understand that do not sin is a plea. It is a plea from Jesus to this woman and a plea to some degree to all of us. Here's what I'm saying. It comes out of compassion in Jesus, not out of command or condemnation. The people then understood that God would be mad and he was probably out to get you if you sinned. Jesus is saying, listen, that's not the concern. Here's the concern. Every sin, every time you don't do what's right or you do what's wrong, every time you go your own way instead of going God's way, every single sin is pre-packaged with a penalty. It's pre-packaged with a punishment. And I know all of you are concerned about what punishment God is going to give you because you sinned. He's telling you, I'm going to remove that condemnation, but I can't remove the prepackaged penalty, because here's what happens with sin. Sin will kill you. It will. It's the sin that will kill you. You have to walk away from your sin. The sin will kill your conscience. Everyone in the crowd knew that. Everyone in this crowd knows that. That there's certain things you can do, and you kind of felt bad about them the first time, and the second time, and the third time, but by the 10th time, you don't even feel bad about them anymore. Because that sin, it just seared, it just killed your conscience. Sin can kill your self-respect. People who know they aren't doing the right thing, know of the choices that they're making consistently, they stand in the mirror often and look at themselves and think, how could you? Because sin will just kill your self-respect. Sin oftentimes will kill your body. God did not design you to do many things that we do to our bodies sinfully. It just kills the body. Sin will kill your mind. It will kill your relationships. It has killed some of your marriages. It tears families apart. Jesus is saying you don't have to worry about the condemnation from God. I will take care of that. You need to worry about the way your sin is killing you. You have to leave your life of sin. This is a plea, and it's a plea, this is very important, from the one who loves you. Yeah, if somebody doesn't love you, if they're just angry, if they're just judging you, like nobody listens to that. But Jesus knows you. And he can see where this is going, and he loves you. John is the one who wrote this down. This is John chapter 8 right here. You remember John chapter 3, verse 16? For God so loved the world, he loved us so much, that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him, encounters him, trusts him, gives their allegiance to him, we won't perish. We don't have to have that condemnation. That's who Jesus is. That's who God is. He loves you. The old covenant said, it's a problem when you break God's commands. The new covenant clarifies, it's a problem when you break God's commands because it breaks God's heart, because God knows where that leads you. And he does not want you to experience the prepackaged penalty that comes with all sin, so you have to leave your life of sin. See, the whole goal here is so that sin will not punish you. So that sin will not punish you. Do not sin is a plea from the one who loves you so that sin, your sin, will not punish you. And so I have to ask this morning, what's your sin? What's your sin? Just you. What's the place where your conscience has already been kind of seared off and it doesn't even click with you anymore? What is it that causes you to look in the mirror and say, this isn't right? What is it that's killing your mind or your body or your relationships? Where is it that God says, trust me and go this way? And you say, nah, I'm going my way. What is your sin? You have to leave it today. You have to walk away from it. You have to move in a different direction. You have to leave your life of sin. I mean, it's kind of wild in the way that you think about this. Jesus would eventually then go to the cross. No doubt people were hearing this in their mind when he's at the cross. And he would take care of our condemnation if you would put yourself in Christ. Your condemnation is taken care of. But you have to leave your life of sin. Philip Yancey, one of the best authors I know when it comes to talking about grace and forgiveness and the power of God in our lives, and yet how we wrestle with that and sometimes fail at it. He makes an observation, which I think is a true observation. Look at the first part of this quote. He says, God took a great risk by announcing forgiveness in advance. Wow, that's true, isn't it? I mean, it's beautiful to know that we can be forgiven of all that we've done wrong. to know that there is no condemnation in Christ Jesus. That's beautiful, and it's kind of risky. It's resting everything on a relationship, thinking that out of God's love, it will prompt us to move the right direction. But I've had a number of conversations over my years as a pastor, and it's kind of odd to me that people talk to me in ways like this. I appreciate it to some degree because people are being honest. Here's what people will say. They'll come to me and they'll say, Greg, I just feel like I need to kind of confess in advance. I'm about to do something wrong. I'm about to do something wrong. And then I can tell they just want to ask. Sometimes they do. Like, will God forgive me later? Like, is it okay to go ahead and do this wrong thing? Because God will forgive me later, right? Like, I'm still going to do it. And sometimes it's not like a new thing or a new event. It's just a habit people are caught up in. They'll be honest with me. They'll say, Greg, it's who I am. I'm stuck. I'm not walking away. I'm going to keep doing it. But God will forgive me, right? God will forgive me, right? And I always sit in those situations and I think, who do you think God is? Like, do you think it's loophole God? You think this is a game? You can just play God? Whatever you do, don't do that. Do not dishonor or disrespect the God of the universe by saying, I tricked him. He said so he has to. Now I do what I want. Do not treat God like that. Whatever you do not treat God like that. The rest of Yancey's quote says, we're not condemned for the wicked things we have done, but for not leaving them. So what is your sin? Leave your life of sin. Walk away from it. Say goodbye to it. Drive the stake in the ground and say, today is the day, no more. Thank God I'm not condemned. I'm going to leave my life of sin. And I talk to people about this. I know how this goes. People say, Greg, it's more complicated than that. I know it's complicated. Trust me. I know that the single decision to walk away from something doesn't mean you don't still have to unwind and disentangle things that got all tangled up by the decisions that we've been making. I know that. I'm not acting as if that isn't true. What I'm suggesting to you, what I think Jesus is suggesting to you, is that it's the single decision to walk away from it, to leave the life of sin, that gives you any hope at all. So it doesn't keep tangling you up and killing you. See, the writer of Hebrews wrote this letter after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, after they had seen Christ on the cross and raised from the dead. And this is what he says: let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. I mean, it's quick. That sin just grabs you. And it tangles things up. It complicates things. And the only thing to do is to throw that off. And let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, on the one who said he would not condemn us, on the one who went to the cross to be sacrificed for my sin. Fix my eyes on the one who overcame sin and death and showed us that new life is possible. Put my eyes on the one who said there can be an old and there can be a new, but you have to walk away. You have to throw it off. And so today, my friends, All of us have something. I'm asking you to throw it off today. To throw it off by confessing it. To throw it off by being honest about it. To throw away your justifications. To throw away letting the complications stand in front of you. To throw it away. I'm asking you today to throw away that contact that's in your phone. I'm asking you today to move out. I'm asking you today to take your hidden stash and destroy it. I'm asking you today to cancel the subscription. I'm asking you today to leave your life of sin. To go confess it to your friend or to your spouse, to get on your knees before God, to be grateful there is no condemnation, and to walk away, knowing that the power that raised Jesus from the dead is the power that is available to you to untangle, unwind, set a new course, doing what's right and holy. I'd like to pray for that right now. God, we're not trying to play you this morning, God. We want to honor you and respect you. And God, what I know from my experience is we're going to need your help. And so, God, give us your strength and your power. Give us moments of clarity. Give us conviction where we don't keep justifying or blaming. Help us to leave our life of sin. In the name of Jesus, amen.